Hello everyone and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. We will shortly have Ms. Christine Arakelian to discuss Armenia's politics and relations with the Armenian Church, diaspora, human rights, and more. Ms. Arakelian is a Fulbright scholar and a lawyer with experience and expertise in international global law and finance and has worked for the Central Intelligence Agency's Office of General Counsel.
But first, everyone, let's take just a quick pause. Thank you for following us. We appreciate the trust that you have put in us to bring you consistent, fact-based analysis of Armenian news. Now, we also want to earn your support, not just your trust. We have a goal for ourselves to reach a sustaining membership of, let's say $1,000 a month so that we can find the support that we need to produce shows more frequently and consistently. But we're very far from that at this point in time. We're not even breaking 20% of our goal. So we look forward to your support, especially sustaining support. Go to our pages, podcasts.groong.org/donates, find our Patreon link, find our Buy Me a Coffee link, become a sustaining member, or give one time. We know that not everybody can do that. Obviously, we're very short of our goals, so not everybody can help us financially. In that case, you can still help us. You can comment and like, and especially you can share our shows. If you like the content, share our shows with your friends so that you can bring them into the readership and they can hear us out. Thank you.
All right, on with the show.
Christine Arakelian, welcome back to the Groong podcast.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be back.
Ms. Arakelian, earlier this week, you were on our show for the first time with Colonel McGregor, but we didn't have time to introduce you to our listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your interests, what keeps you busy, and what keeps you awake at night.
What keeps me awake at night? So I'm an attorney by training. I actually resumed the practice of law in the past year. What facilitated that is some constitutional law litigation I'm undertaking in Virginia. It now sits at the Fourth Circuit. So I'm challenging the constitutionality of a law that allows Virginia government officials to introduce false evidence and to deny citizens hearings in real estate property taxation issues. It's actually quite relevant to democracy because without due process rights in the context of real property, fundamentally, we don't actually have any freedom. Okay, so a lot is at stake here, not just for Virginia, but across the country. And I'm also serving as outside counsel to a company up in Vermont. We recently concluded a deal with the Australian government. I actually negotiated that deal. It's very cool. So what this company does is basically develop frameworks for intra-company and with external partners to facilitate relationships based on trust. Okay. And one of the things we're looking to do is develop that in a governmental sphere such that multilateral and bilateral relationships are enhanced. So it's taking what in fact is a very well-developed methodology of thought that has been validated from a psychological perspective and correlated to shareholder returns and moving it into a government sphere. So that's very cool. But in terms of my background, I mean, I've done a lot of things. Some people talk about a portfolio career. That's kind of my career. I've always been international. So people say, how do you know so much about all these different things? My first job was outside the United States. I worked for Cleary Gottlieb in Frankfurt, Germany. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in '94 and immediately started doing international work. And then I went to UVA Law. Continued doing international work. After my first year of law school, I was at the State Department in the Office of Environmental and Scientific Affairs. And then the summer thereafter, I was with the CIA, the Office of General Counsel, as well as a firm that's now called Hogan Lovells, but at the time it was called Hogan and Hartson, and did corporate work. And then from corporate work, I was tapped on the shoulder by an investment banker saying, why are you doing this? You need to be negotiating deals. And then I had a very successful career negotiating deals all over the world. Ran M&A and strategy for 3 Fortune 500 companies. And truly it was a global experience. And so I took this geostrategic outlook, married it with my commercial deal making and on the ground experience. And all of a sudden you get insights that a lot of people fundamentally don't have. I feel very blessed actually for experience I've had, because I think it is actually more comprehensive in a lot of ways than anything I would have gotten at the government. From there, basically, I applied for a Fulbright to Saudi Arabia, got that. Then the Armenian government approached me, can you be an Igor's fellow? So I did that. Then I did some government advisory work, and then resumed my legal career. So here we are.
Wonderful, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk about myself.
Yeah. On top of all of this, you're an Armenian who loves her homeland, so thank you for that as well.
I do.
Towards the end of May, let's begin our discussion with the church issue. So towards the end of May, the Catholicos of all Armenians, Garegin II, attended the World Council of Churches conference. It was, I believe, co-organized by the WCC as well as the Armenian Apostolic Church, but I may be mistaken about that. But it was a conference in Bern dedicated to Artsakh, and he raised the issue of the rights of Artsakhtsis, whether that's the right to return, whether it includes, he also talked about the right to preservation of cultural and religious heritage in occupied Artsakh. And immediately after that conference, Pashinyan and his wife started this vile, attack against the church that began with social media and ended up with threats. And we now have two archbishops under arrest. We also have a prominent supporter of the Armenian Church, Samvel Karapetyan, who is a benefactor who has helped many different issues, including Artsakh, including housing many displaced Artsakhtsis. He's now in jail, and in fact, just yesterday, his 2-month pre-trial detention was extended. And his crime was to say that if the politicians can't defend the church, and I will defend the church in my own way. And that was enough to be seen as a threat, to be put behind bars and without any chance of even like bail or anything else like that. So I wanted to ask you how you see things from your side. Do you see this as just a mere coincidence? What prompted this attack against the Armenian Church? We know that the Pashinyan government never had a huge love for the Armenian Church. Maybe that's my subjective opinion, but what prompted this campaign against the church, which is basically going strong even to this day?
Well, clearly, Pashinyan has had contempt and dislike for the Armenian Church for a period of years. I think that that's fairly obvious. Okay, they didn't start off on a good footing. Pashinyan does not strike me as religious. I think that's a fair point as well. I know that it perhaps is a controversial comment, and some people in the Civil Contract Party would take issue with it, but I think it's incontrovertible that he does not seem to be a particularly devout person. I thought it was hilarious that he was a speaker at the International Religious Freedom Summit this past year in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he has been quoting Psalms daily nowadays. He didn't used to do that before, but now he seems to be having some advice from someone.
So let me tell you something. This comes from Catholic lore. Even the devil can recite the creed because it's true, but what they won't do is basically worship God. So at the end of the day, reciting a psalm is not really what this is about. Even Jesus said in the gospel, many people will say, Lord, Lord, and he'll say, I don't recognize you, get out. So you really have to think hard. It reminds me of these sort of, evangelical pastors who, happen to have 10 mistresses on the side and run a porn shop. I mean, there's a lot of people who say Jesus, Jesus, and it's not doing anything for me. Actions speak louder than words. But why now? Well, first of all, let's sort of set some context. Pashinyan wants to do some things that are unpopular. They're unpopular, first and foremost, with the Armenian people. They're unpopular with the Armenian diaspora, okay? And the church has been a critic of some of the things that Pashinyan has done. We also know that there's elections in 2026, June 2026, right? We're poised to have elections. So what's a convenient thing to do to clear things out? Scare people, imprison people, okay? It's a well-known tactic. Armenia is not the first or the last country to engage in these types of things. And then the question is this been prompted by foreign powers? Because I think it seems rather evident that there's a lot of foreign powers that have tremendous influence in Armenia in terms of the decisions that are being made there. Okay, and that includes Pashinyan. Now, it's not limited to Pashinyan. Just want to be clear. It's not. It's not limited to Pashinyan. There's foreign influence in many different spheres in Armenia for many different political parties and many different entities. That's a different discussion. But there absolutely is foreign government influence on Pashinyan. One of the interesting things was the comment Macron made, and basically seemingly in support of what Pashinyan was undertaking. That
was a day or two after Samvel Karapetyan's arrest. And just for context, Macron said, I wholly support Pashinyan, and I condemn any outside intervention, because Pashinyan was saying that Samvel Karapetyan was an outsider, even though he's an Armenian citizen. He is also a Russian citizen. But it was interesting how that was framed and how Macron basically himself jumped into that, effort. So,
yeah, it's very short-sighted. I think in part it stems from, French history and the French Revolution and the rabid anti-clericalism and the purge they did basically within, France of clerics, right? They have a radical secularization as a general matter in France that is not replicated in other Western democracies. So, one of the things that is sort of a red herring issue, and you hear this from Civil Contract and Pashinyan and his supporters, is, well, we have separation of church and state. Well, let's kind of take a look at that, okay? Because they love to say this in particularly to get support from the US government and other people here in the United States. So first of all, the Trump administration just changed the rules with respect to churches. I don't know whether you saw it or not, but in the United States, church leaders, priests, pastors, etc., can endorse candidates from the pulpit. That is a radical change from historic precedent. And I think it's because, candidly, there's a recognition in the United States that free speech for people of faith has been in some ways suppressed. All you need to do is look at what happened in the Biden administration. They're basically sending FBI agents into churches, okay, in a covert mechanism and basically spying. And apparently the spying that was taking place on American Catholics was far more extensive. So there needs to be some type of correction, okay? So when you look at what's happening in Armenia from that lens, meaning that pastors or priests can comment upon political events, don't priests have a right to free speech as well? Or is that basically non-existent, right? That Pashinyan gets to basically put himself in a zone that is free of criticism. That's quite remarkable. Right. So, I mean, candidly, I think the notion of separation of church and state is extremely exaggerated and manipulated to justify what is taking place here. OK, there are many democracies that have closer ties to religion. Let's say, for example, Germany. In Germany, the Lutheran and the Catholic churches are supported by the government. You are actually taxed through the government, and it is the government that supports the churches. Okay, so as you look at different Western democracies, depending on their history, depending upon their tradition, they have different relations with the church. Okay, so
if I just may add also to that, I'm sorry, but I should add, we don't have to go that far even to Germany. We're like in north of us in Georgia. The Georgian government supports the churches because it's reparations for the years of Soviet appropriation of church property. So that the government is paying reparations, and we also know how strong the Georgian church is in terms of deciding policy or influencing policy in Georgia. So apparently the West. I mean, I know the West has been trying to go against the Georgian church as well, but they seem to be allowed a much bigger leeway, especially when someone they liked was in power.
Right, or even Russia. Russia obviously has a close relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church, but it is not the sole religion of all of Russia. Okay, there are other historically recognized religions, including, by the way, Islam. Okay, there is a role for historic churches that has to be recognized in certain parts of the world, particularly the Orthodox part of the world. Okay, the Catholic Church had a very different history. So simply sort of saying separation of church and state, particularly given that the United States has just effectively amended its interpretation of the laws such that churches can actually endorse or not endorse a particular political leader, Armenia needs to rethink that, because fundamentally where Armenia stands right now on separation of church and state does not align with the United States if they're looking to the United States to be like a key ally in light of what has taken place with the corridor.
Does Armenia's constitution mandate an ironclad separation of church and state like the United States?
To be honest, I'd have to look at the Constitution much more closely to determine that. I confess that I do not know that specificity at this point.
I know there's reference in the Constitution, but my reading, and I'm not a lawyer or a constitutionalist at all, is not that there needs to be a firewall between the two, and certainly not at the level where you have to prevent bishops or archbishops or Catholics from expressing their views on government. And certainly it has been a very one-way street, because Pashinyan not only wants to express himself on this government wants to express itself on the church, they want to replace the Catholicus. If we want separation of church and state, we want a two-way street.
Well, correct. And this is where the rubber meets the pavement. And this is really, really important. So first of all, I think Armenia at this point is at a moment in history that is analogous to Henry VIII and Sir Thomas More and what took place there. Because let's just say, for example, Pashinyan replaces the Catholicos, okay? It's no longer the Armenian Apostolic Church. It's a totally different church.
Exactly.
Okay. The fact of the matter is that that's like saying, well, we're going to keep the Baradak, right? The divine liturgy, for those who are not Armenian and watching this, okay? But it's been gutted. It's been gutted. That's like saying the Anglican liturgy is similar to the Catholic liturgy, so therefore Anglican and Catholic are the same thing. No, they're not. The theology is completely different. Once you have a theology that effectively allows a secular ruler to come in and replace the head of a church, by the way, that is not a church that is specific to Armenia. It's for Armenians all over the globe. It is a global church. So a secular ruler, this is actually really important. Pashinyan's very keen on, I'm a real Armenia, real Armenia, real Armenia. Okay, the Armenian church, Echmiadzin, is a global church. Why should a secular ruler in Armenia determine the Catholicos for somebody living in Canada or the United States? I mean, talk about overreach. He has absolutely nothing to say about how Echmiadzin is run. Period. None. It is a gross overreach, and what it's actually doing is introducing what in effect is the Protestant Reformation to Armenia and that part of the world. And it's going to be a huge risk because, for this corridor to succeed, okay, it's not, again, I'm going to go back to a point I made with both of you earlier. Everyone's talking about we're going to invest in infrastructure. People use these terms, they don't even know what they mean. Infrastructure is a outcome. It's not a strategy. It is the result of working with a lot of different people, harmonizing laws, regulations, so that they can facilitate trade and work with one another. Therefore, a physical infrastructure is needed. You don't build a physical infrastructure, not support it with underlying institutions, laws, regulations, governing bodies, etc., and then pretend that that's going to work. This is, again, what like a government bureaucrat thinks, or somebody who in tech who thinks that basically I'm just going to have something AI, and all it is buzzwords. Okay. Yeah. All you need to do is go back and look at what the Chinese have invested in terms of their state economy in the 80s and 90s and see how colossally it failed. Now we're in the American version of it, potentially.
Yeah.
Okay? So that means that for Armenia to facilitate that type of role for the US in a larger region, people are going to have to recognize Armenia. If it's effectively becoming sort of a Protestantized state with a Orthodox liturgy that has an ecclesiastical governing structure that is unrecognizable, all you need to do is actually look at Ukraine. Because guess what? The Ukrainian church that was backed by the West is not recognized by anyone other than Constantinople, the ecumenical patriarch, and that's going nowhere. That's going nowhere in Orthodoxy. So at the end of the day, there are big ramifications for Armenia and the region if Pashinyan is empowered to do any of the things that he says that he wants to do.
To me, the fact that Pashinyan has been able to last so long in his criticism or even persecution of the Armenian Church, including all the political arrests associated with it, to me, it seems like he's been successful. And part of that success, could be, I'm just wondering, is it because we're not getting enough support? For instance, I've seen some religious groups, like I believe the World Council of Churches has condemned the attack against archbishops, but even, for instance, the Trump administration, who has in the past talked about Armenian Christians being persecuted, hasn't been very vocal about this. What do you attribute this to, and what could be done to change the situation?
So I had some calls today on this exact topic with people who will have to remain off the record. But what I'll say is this. It's not they don't see it going on. They just figure, look, we got our hands full. This is an Armenian issue. We just want to be there for the trade. We don't want to be involved. And I think that is, oh, by the way, we want to break up Russia and Iran, and this is going to be very effective. And so let the Armenians worry about this. We just want to put the infrastructure in for the corridor, which again, government largesse does not create a successful corridor. That's not actually what it is. And I'm fearful that this has just become another government boondoggle until instead of an opportunity to transform the region. Look, bottom line is that you have to have a situational awareness. It's not just trade. And one of the challenges of the Trump administration, candidly, are a group of people who have great financial backgrounds, but don't seem to have an understanding of the history of the region and what it takes to be successful there. Okay. It's a little bit of what you see taking place actually in Alaska today. That's another topic maybe we can touch on. But fundamentally, the problem is this, is that the U.S. is going to have to deal with, first of all, Russian influence in the TRIP corridor, right? The Trump corridor that is now being backed by Armenia and the United States. Okay, so how are you going to deal with Russian influence? Russian influence is going to be enhanced if the Russians basically are viewed as the supporters of the Armenian people and the Armenian Church. The Armenian Church is, for better or for worse, viewed as an authentic voice of the Armenian people. You're never going to distance yourself from that. You're never going to get away from that. And I think fundamentally Karapetyan's comments were effectively saying the same thing. How can you separate the Armenian people from the church? The other issue is, and again, this goes back to Karapetyan, the fact of the matter is that when you are arresting people and seizing their assets, how are you going to get private investment for that corridor?
That was my next question, actually. I want to touch on what the confiscation of his assets, for example, the electric network of Armenia and things like that, are having on foreign direct investment in Armenia. Are you willing to put $1 million, $10 million, or $1 billion into Armenia? What about this $500 million alleged plan to have an AI data center? Can you trust a government that can just basically come in and say, we are taking this?
No, you can't. And by the way, I would say the same thing with respect to whatever U.S. consortium comes in. I'm hearing talk of basically a consortium that's a fait accompli. Okay, you can do it that way, but guess what? It's going to be very short-lived. The key question with Pashinyan are where his economic interest, because we know that basically certain people in his administration have financial interest that have been undisclosed. We know that. That is not hidden. And so fundamentally between, self-dealing in a number of different ways, as well as lack of transparency and arresting people you disagree with and seizing their assets, would you go into Armenia? Would you put $1 million in? It could be a robust democracy, but it's not. And the writing was on the wall. several years ago when people are flying into Yerevan and Pashinyan doesn't like their political viewpoints and refuses them entry into the country. On what basis?
Correct.
That's not a democracy. You've lost your ability to have free speech. Fundamentally, and look, I have a very different attitude. You want to criticize me? No problem. I prefer, let's get on the podcast and we'll debate and we'll have anyone can criticize me. And if Pashinyan had that approach, candidly, things would be very different. But he's very brittle and he fundamentally shoots down people who disagree with him. It's very harmful, and it will absolutely harm U.S. interest in what they're looking to accomplish there, whether they realize it or not.
Christine, you did say a little earlier that Macron sounded off with full support for Pashinyan a little bit earlier, just as these issues started. Well, the West has been silent on a lot of issues, a lot of undemocratic issues that are going on in Armenia. Why is that? Pashinyan seems to have a free hand doing anything he wants, and the West will not say anything against him. Why is that? This has included, of course, police persecutions, and there was an article yesterday in Azadutyun that Armenia has been using the police and force to subdue a lot of free speech and a lot of anti-government activities that should be allowed in a democratic government.
Right. So you raise very, very important points. First, let's keep in mind that while Armenians are extremely interested in all things Armenian, it's not always top of mind for different people around the world. But now let's go to the substance of your point, right? I think ultimately the reason for that is the West perception that they will keep Pashinyan in to do their bidding. The risk is, of course, is that they become so associated with Pashinyan, okay, that in other words, that when Pashinyan is removed, all of their efforts collapse. That's why the involvement of the diaspora, why good relations with the Armenian Church. Again, you don't have to be an apologist for the church, okay? You just have to respect their rights. Those are two totally different things, okay? The issue of the Armenian Church is not about, it's not about whether you're a person of faith or not. It's actually whether you believe in free speech and democracy and rights. That's actually what it's about. So my hope is that the U.S. is not short-sighted, as well as other Western countries, and fundamentally look the other way, thinking that there's going to be a positive outcome. To make the type of investments that need to be made in that corridor, you're looking at very long-term investments. That requires stability. Armenia is not at a point of stability. And what was his latest approval rating for Pashinyan? I know it was hovering 12, 13%.
Yeah, it was at 13%. I don't think I've seen a poll that has happened since the summit in Washington, D.C. I'm expecting there will be a little temporary bump. And
I don't think people have high expectations because I think people have lost, confidence in Pashinyan.
They really have. They really have.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like that is a position of a weakness for the United States. And again, for a 99-year lease, I mean, it's
well,
not.
We haven't seen anything written yet, as far as I know.
No, but I will say this: the U.S. has reached some agreements with Armenia. They've never made them public.
That's right. And I'm quite concerned about it. But Hovik, you scour Armenian media extensively. What's your impression of the response to the Washington meeting?
Honestly, it's very much an issue that is spinned by different sides. So I was surprised to see some even moderate channels who in the past have criticized Pashinyan now are saying that, well, see, it mentions sovereignty there, so we have our sovereignty. I mean, it's seasoned with a lot of hallucinations, in my opinion, or maybe deliberate lies about the fate of where this is going. But I believe that the Western pro-Western factions are misrepresenting the true nature of this deal. And in fact, I'm concerned because I'm not sure if the U.S. really has long-term interests here, other than to support Israel and Turkish projects in the region, geopolitical projects. I believe Tom Barak said that this idea of the U.S. being involved in this corridor was a suggestion of Erdogan himself. So
I really think that
that
he was
worries me a
echoing
lot.
Turkish
Well,
interests.
well,
Absolutely.
I just want to be clear, though. I've been speaking about the U.S. involvement in this corridor for several years. And in fact, I've been a big proponent of it. So
Hmm.
all it means is basically good ideas are being picked up by Tom Barrack and others and then championed for their own reasons. It's not a reason, in other words, for Armenians to disassociate themselves with it. It's we have to articulate it better. We have to make it work for our purposes. We have to have a closer relationship with the US government. And in turn, the US government's going to need to work and open the kimono. I would say that this State Department is almost just as closed as the prior one in the Biden administration. Okay?
Well, one of the arguments made to support this U.S. involvement is the fact that because U.S. workers, U.S. companies will be present in this corridor is a security guarantee. I have doubts about it, and I have doubts about like if the U.S. committed military resources to protecting this corridor, then I would say even okay, fine, and especially we were maintaining the sovereignty. The same thing that the Russians were offering to do was maintain the sovereignty and commit military resources. Now we have no military resources. We have a very expansionist and imperial Turkey and Azerbaijan. At the same time, the US and Trump are saying, okay, just because of our business interests, then everyone will be scared of us. I'm not sure I'm ready to buy that.
So actually, I'm really glad you articulated it just like that, like because let me articulate it a little bit differently for you with some more nuance, okay, that I think is taking place, okay?
Yeah.
It's not so much that people are enamored with Turkey, it's what's the next best alternative? The US clearly has interest, okay, in the region. Turkey is a big player. You have to deal with Turkey, okay? So I don't think it's so much that people are enamored with Turkey across the board, but you got to deal with it, okay?
Mhm.
Similarly with Armenia, okay? Because I'm just sort of trying to explain the mental thinking that went into this deal and like what could come of it. Okay. Again, if you play the cards right, everything is about playing your cards right. Fundamentally, many of the criticisms of the deal from an Armenian perspective are correct. The problem is, of course, is what's your next best alternative? The fact is that Armenia does not have anybody signing up to be in a military alliance with Armenia at the moment.
So let me tell you about the alternative that I was thinking about. So we have Arman Grigoryan, who is a regular guest on our podcast, and he was giving an interview saying that basically this corridor, if there's any corridor, if there is, because we have two powerful states on our east and west trying to sort of actually use this corridor as a stepping stone for further, like, degradation of Armenian sovereignty and so forth. And if there is any foreign involvement, he was essentially saying it's better to have the Russians do this because they're willing to commit forces and they have interest in the region. The U.S., I'm not sure how we can say that the U.S. has an interest in the region. I'm not sure if especially to the level that they would commit the same amount of forces and they would be willing to protect it as much as the Russians would. So how would you address that criticism?
Let's take 10 steps back.
Hmm.
Okay. What primarily ails the United States at the moment is not military, it's economic. Okay. If you take a look at basically sort of our top tier companies, right, and there are far fewer of them. The market cap has gotten larger, and you're dealing with more sort of hegemonic monopolistic companies, okay, that effectively are tied to the United States government. I go to these countries all the time. I mean, the US presence is basically tremendously atrophied. Unless they're basically latched to the side of the US government, they have no interest in engaging. Okay. The military is literally negotiating deals on behalf of tech companies in different markets across the globe. What business does the US military have in negotiating deals on behalf of Amazon? None. None. Okay. I can make a very strong argument. So All of this is a function fundamentally of American weakness from a commercial perspective globally. And I mentioned this on the podcast with Doug McGregor. What does that correspond to? It corresponds to lack of market share. Lack of market share corresponds to higher cost. You can't spread your cost as much. Okay, and you can't compete on price. The US wants to guarantee profit margins for a bunch of different industries that fundamentally can't support anymore as a standalone country. This is a big issue. So how does Armenia play into this? Armenia shouldn't be viewed as simply part of the middle corridor with Turkey and Azerbaijan. That's foolish. The United States has needed to rethink the India, Middle East, European corridor for some period of time. I've been actually one of the biggest critics. It was nice. It sounded nice. It got some good press releases. That's it. There's no substance to it. There's no substance to it because fundamentally, like jerry-rigging some corridor based on I like this one and I don't like this one and I want India to work with Israel and then we're going to go over here and we're going to do land and then sea and then land. Can you be serious? Why don't you take a look at the original corridors that existed? Well, as somebody else said, there happens to be something called the Silk Route that effectively went through those parts of Armenia, where there were. And in fact, the Armenian attributes of entrepreneurialism, of hard work, of getting along with all different sorts of people, all of that was a function of Armenia's geography and the sorts of people that were going through. Armenians have a remarkable capability of working. So fundamentally, the US interest is not just with that corridor and Turkey and Azerbaijan. It's what's your plan to counter Belt and Road? None. There is none. So fundamentally, that now that the US has committed to it, okay, but there's no real plans being discussed with the India, Middle East, European corridor, what people in the US government are going to need to do is take 10 steps back and say, we have to go back to the drawing board. How do these two relate to one another? Well, the way they relate to one another is from a data perspective, okay, because that's a lot of what's missing in the region. Meaning Armenia, for the first time, can participate in wider economies of scale that here to date has been completely excluded, which is in fact one of Armenia's biggest Achilles heels. The Eurasian Economic Union has been a zero. Russia's done a very bad job leading the Eurasian Economic Union. And yes, it is their job actually to lead it because it's a bloc that's supposed to be under their umbrella, okay? They've not done the job that they need to. They're years behind. And it's basically been like the ugly stepchild, okay? It's just not, it's punching well below its weight. And it's not Armenia's job to fix it. Armenia has needed to participate in economies of scale. And if they did, Armenians would be able to go back and work and live in Armenia instead of having to go to the Gulf or other places to work. Because Armenia is completely disconnected from the surrounding geography. So when you think about it from that perspective, what is on the table for Armenia is very significant. It's both for the US and Armenia that cannot be remedied. Now, the US could never give a security guarantee to Armenia, but insofar as it has interest in the region, it's certainly going to defend its interest. Remember, Israel has no ironclad security guarantees either, right? We also defend maritime.
But at least America can get to Israel. There's the Mediterranean, and they have access directly to the country's seashores. But how would, even if the United States or France wanted to help Armenia, how would they physically get there to help?
The United States has the capability to get to Armenia physically.
It would have to be through Turkey, and Turkey will never do anything to help Armenia, at least if they're the enemy at this point. But let me pick an argument about the Eurasian Economic Union. I do agree with you that it's punching below its weight, and it is an organization that's basically Russia-centric and everybody else after that. But what are the alternatives today when 40% of Armenia's economy depends on this union? And it has given it benefits like no tariffs, no this, no that, just it's an economic union as we understand it, sort of like the old NAFTA or the US, Mexico, Canada thing. So there are benefits to it, and I just don't see where Armenia would go if it were to dump that. I just don't see if Armenia drops out, where would it go? It's not like it has a a real economic tie with Europe, there's like hundreds of millions. With America, there's a couple of 100 million there as well. But then with Russia, it's $6 billion. How do you
Right.
replace? So that's my concern. And Armenia's government has tried to have this resilience thing, which actually is diversifying away from Russia so that they're not as dependent on Russia, which is fine. I agree with that. Armenia should have diversity in order to be able to say no to somebody. But I just don't see that happening anytime soon. It's going to be a decade of work.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about this. Okay. There's no way that Armenia could keep its current GDP and switch things out, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
But growth solves a bunch of problems that countries have, and growth will solve a problem for Armenia, okay? If you take a look at Armenia's real economic growth over the past couple of years, and when I mean real economic growth, I'm talking about enterprise grade investments. When you have enterprise grade investments in a country, they're very difficult to pull back. Meaning, even if you have a couple down years, you're going to eke it out, because once you decide to put infrastructure in and an enterprise network, you're not going to pull it back very easily. Okay? Armenia lags in terms of enterprise investments. Period.
It does.
Okay? And the fact is that the Pashinyan administration and the government officials have been way too happy with what in essence were economic gains from a fluke that basically stemmed from sanctions on Russia and profiting from it. Whether that meant Russians moving into Armenia and having a real estate bubble, whether that meant that you were basically trading items, with Russia, like the used cars, that was pretty well known. Okay, a host of different things that people made a lot of money off of, but is not going to secure Armenia's long-term future.
Absolutely. And most of it has not benefited to the Armenian tax base either.
Correct. So Armenia's got to look elsewhere, okay, for these big growth gains, okay? Because it's not going to come from Russia. What they have with Russia is already there, but where are the gains going to come from? Well, let's look first of all at India. India is a pretty important economic partner, okay? There could be a lot more robust trade there. I've thought for some period of time that Armenia should have secured a relationship with the GCC and UAE. UAE concluded, it's called a SEPA agreement, a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Georgia. Now, UAE has made investments in Armenia. Why hasn't the Armenian government been able to conclude a SEPA deal with the UAE government? Because if you did that, actually, you'd have a gateway. And there's plenty of Armenian government officials who've discussed things with UAE, but they've never been able to get what Georgia had several years ago. Meaning, it's the ability to attract enterprise-grade investments depends on your ability to conclude these agreements, okay? And there are other countries negotiating multilateral trade deals with the GCC. That's a very obvious thing that Armenia could be doing or should have done by now. And Georgia already has a SEPA deal with the UAE, and Armenia has none. And
Can you say why? Do we know why?
Well, look, I mean, I have to be a little bit careful, okay? But at the end of the day, I just think like one of the Air Arabia investments went south. Okay, that's all public information. If you talk with people who are familiar with that, it's not looking so good. Okay, so people get spooked very easily. Let's just put it that way. Okay, it's good. Okay, and so it's similar to to some other investments that have taken place there with great fanfare, where basically it just hasn't been adequately supported. Are there accounting irregularities? I mean, the second you start talking about things like that, people just don't have the time of day. Okay, you have to be enterprise grade. So I do think the Armenian government has not pursued interest in the region to the extent that it needs to. And in fact, in order to be valuable to the United States, Armenia is going to have to be regionally focused. This is now the funny thing. You concluded a deal with the United States, the most powerful, important country on the planet. I love the United States, just to be clear. I'm thankful for the right of free speech that I have, but it's always capable of being a better country. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, Armenia, in order to be important to the United States, is going to have to do things that at the moment the United States cannot do. Are they? No, they're not. It's not just going to be happening with the magic wand.
Christine, if you were advising the Armenian government, what would you tell them in order to really move the needle on the Armenia-India relationship? Like you, I think definitely there's nothing wrong with expanding Armenia's relationship with India. They have a huge pharmaceutical, knowledge base and ability to help Armenia that way. I can only see benefit, but it seems to be stagnant or improving in very incremental terms.
Yeah, I think the challenge for the Armenian government in candor is execution. Okay. It's almost like the crossroads of peace. All I saw was this map with like arrows going in different directions. Okay. Where did it advance beyond that? I don't know. I know that the US will do a lot more with it than Crossroads of Peace, but Crossroads of Peace was an idea. Okay. It's sort of like saying we're going to invest in infrastructure. Again, that's an outcome. That's not a strategy. So Armenia needs people who can implement, period. Okay. And believe it or not, implementation is really done with very small, agile teams. Okay. When I ran M&A and I would like be in charge of an integration and I'm taking the number of people we had running that was like 2, 3, 4 people, right? You don't need a lot of people. You just need good people who are empowered. Instead, when you look at the Armenian government, you have a lot of people, power is diffused. Who's responsible for what? Who's on first base? You don't know. Okay. The governing structures, in other words, are not crisp. They don't facilitate movement. And overall, when you're in an environment like that, people don't want to stick their neck out and do stuff in case somebody points fingers and says, oh, you did something wrong. Now I can pick on you. It's easier just to be on the sidelines. So, you might look at these, governing structures and say, oh, this is the way to do things, but that's only on paper. That's not reality. Usually it's a few people who spearhead things and get it done. And that's what Armenia needs to do. They need like just a handful of people and candidly, other people just need to basically support that in other ways, but they don't need to be hands-on involved. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I do think the major criticism from the India side has been candidly just the lack of results in working with Armenia. It's been a lot of effort expended and no results.
Actually, I was going to ask you exactly that. Is the problem the same thing where the Armenian government is unable to take the next step after a concept is, let's say, put on a slide?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
They're totally different skill sets.
Yeah, because one of the questions I had about the India topic is where is it stopped, actually? Are we stopping them or are they stopping us? So this tells me that, the ball is in our court. And in fact, our Indian friends have told us the ball is in Armenia's court, but nobody's taking the next step.
I mean, one of the basic things is we don't even have a direct flight between the two countries. So,
right.
I mean,
and the flights to Europe are far and few between. But India is going to matter a lot to the United States. Today is actually India's Independence Day. Okay. And
happy Independence Day to our Indian listeners.
Yeah, happy Independence Day. But Modi at the moment is talking about self-reliance. He is actually coming closer to the Chinese. There's talk now that they're going to have cross-border trade with China on their border, which has been closed for a period of years. And in fact, they're doing this simply because they feel unnerved by the United States and the Trump administration with the tariffs. Okay, so meaning this is a point in time in which an Armenian outreach to India could be extremely beneficial to the United States. Okay, that is a very, very important relationship. Whether that is recognized at this moment in time or not, it nevertheless will be the case. The United States has given the appearance of being favorable to Pakistan. Okay, again, it's a mistake. It's a mistake. we should have good relations with all the countries in that region to unlock its economic potential if fundamentally the US wants to lead with economic initiatives, which is, I think, a key part of the Trump presidency.
Christine, earlier you said something, and I want to take us back to that point in the discussion when we were talking about the church. And you said there is a lot of foreign influence in Armenia. And I believe that's not unique to Armenia. We saw what happened in Georgia. We saw what happened in Ukraine. And we see what happened when Georgia, for instance, tried to enact a regulation, like something very similar to what the US had, which is FARA, or maybe not so similar, I'm not sure. But in any case, there was a very, I would say, allergic or violent reaction from this, from EU and the West. So Armenia is also no different in terms of the influence of these NGOs. For a country of 3 million people, there are thousands of NGOs. Estimates vary from 2 to 9,000. And the key ones essentially are the Western funded ones because, yes, you can have an NGO, but if you don't have any funding. So there are some serious US and EU funded and powered NGOs that run in Armenia. And most of them support, if not all of them, support Pashinyan. So I wanted to ask you, does Armenia need some kind of a regulation like FARA to identify or help limit the influence of foreign-funded organizations?
Yes. Yes. I mean, so look, a lot of this is how it gets done versus what. So let's distinguish. So let's take, for example, the Internal Security Service that is operating now under Pashinyan. Does Armenia need an intelligence service? Yes. Did for a long time. Hard to have a sovereign state without having some type of intelligence function. However you want to call that, your national security service, however, whatever acronym you want to use, doesn't matter. But guess what? If that internal security service or intelligence function turns on its own people and spies on its own people, well, guess what? You've just destroyed your democracy. This is in part what has taken place with the Armenian Church. Those tools that have been invested in, much of which had the support of the United States, has turned inward. So do you need one? Yeah, you need one. But the number one thing you need to do is to control its utilization, because otherwise it's going to be used to politically wallop people. The point of FARA is not to stem free speech. It's not to control speech. The point is to know who's paying for it. That's what it is.
That's right.
And we have to know who's paying for it, just like we do in the United States. I don't really see that. I'd like to see Armenia develop national institutions that prioritize the formation of an Armenian identity with loyalties to Armenia. Okay? We should be able to tolerate all types of speech, okay, other than violent overthrow. Okay, let's just be clear. I no way, but I'm an extreme proponent of free speech, to the point where, again, think about the 1970s, Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, I'll support your right for free. I loathe you, but I'll support your right for free speech. That's where we need to get with Armenia, in order for Armenia to play the role it needs to in the region. And so, yeah, we do. We need to have laws on this, and they need to be controlled and they need to be enforced.
Okay. So another topic I want to take us back to is, in 2024, a new Washington, D.C. based group called Save Armenia, a Judeo-Christian alliance, emerged. It has been featured prominently during Pashinyan's foreign visits. You mentioned the prayer breakfast. And anytime that they have been in the country, they have been welcomed by top Armenian leaders, such as the president, Vahagan Khachaturian, and even the national security chief, Armen Grigoryan. Now,
that was very strange.
Is this organization?
That was really strange for me.
Who are they, and what is its relationship to both the Armenian government and the Trump administration? Because also I want to mention maybe that when this trip deal happened, various groups such as ANCA said, okay, fine, let's do the trip, but they also used that issue to bring attention to the fact that Armenians have been displaced from Artsakh, that we have political prisoners in Baku. None of this was addressed. Save Armenia, the announcement from Save Armenia was mostly a celebration of the agreement, nothing else. So to me, that's veering a little bit into politics. I mean, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but nothing about persecution of Armenian clergy in Armenia itself. So who is Save Armenia? What can you tell us about that?
So look, I know the principals at Save Armenia. I know some people who are on the board. I've met with them. What I would say is this, and I'm going to use their terminology. I'm not using my terminology. Okay. So if I am incorrect, someone from Save Armenia can email me and say I'm not correct, and we can have Save Armenia on the program and we'll have a debate about it. Okay. The point of Save Armenia is to articulate why Armenia is important for non-Armenian constituencies. Okay. And they're specifically focused on evangelicals, and they're focused on Zionists within American politics. That is why the principles of Save Armenia are in fact not Armenian. It's a very curious organization. The leadership is not Armenian, but they are about Armenia. Now, Save Armenia does have, obviously, a relationship with the Armenian government, or they wouldn't be meeting with the president of Armenia and other public figures in Yerevan and posting it on the internet and doing all of these things. It raises some very serious questions. Save Armenia is a 501c3. Why is a 501c3 meeting with the foreign government? Nobody seems to ask those questions.
Are they registered as a foreign agent?
They are not. They are not. Mm-hmm. But it is registered as a 501c3. That is a fact. Mm-hmm. So we only have to talk facts. We have to be very careful, okay? But these are all facts. It is a 501c3. So you have a 501c3 basically meeting with a foreign government, coming back to DC, where they have basically influence in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
I think it says it all. I don't really think I need to say more than that. There's other components there. Probably should be my own lawyer and not say anything more. But at the end of the day, it's very unusual that you would see a 501c3 granted that level of access by a foreign government.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay? And that is just factual. What I will say as well, and now I'm going to be more pointed because it's directly at the Armenian government instead of Save Armenia. Makun's has been an exceptionally weak ambassador. What people basically say about her is she's the nicest person in DC. You don't get brownie points in DC for being super nice. Okay. And consequently, she has looked to expand a network in ways that basically have not benefited Armenia. Period. By the way, you can see this as well with what happened with Menendez and his wife. Okay.
Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm. That was a disaster for Armenia. That was a disaster for other countries as well, but it was a big disaster for Armenia because prior to that arrest, and it seemed pretty clear to me, there were things going on that people shouldn't be doing. And everyone's hoo-hoo, ha-ha, until basically you get nailed because people pay attention. And what generally happens is people get oblivious. They get, you get away with something once and then you say to yourself, I can do it again. And then I can do it again. And then you become more open and you become more brazen. It's almost like you will get on people's radar screens. People do know what's happening in DC. Okay. And so fundamentally, the weakness of the Armenian embassy has had a tremendous impact in terms of Armenia-US relations. Now you might say, but wait a minute. Armenia signed an agreement with the United States and did this and did that. But again, that's a very distinctive mentality where signing a piece of paper means something. It doesn't. Doing something means something. Okay?
Yeah. So the diaspora, relations with the diaspora are another can of worms. Maybe we should wait another episode so that we can talk about it in more detail, because Hovik and I have a few questions, but we're running out of time.
Okay.
So let's leave that for next time. But I do want to ask one question on what you just said about this contract that may or may not be signed between the United States and Armenia for TRIP, the Trump route for prosperity and peace.
Mm-hmm.
Today, Putin and Trump are having a summit in Alaska.
Yes.
Do you think that this corridor is on the agenda of discussions? And second, how will Trump and Putin reconcile the fact that Azerbaijan and Armenia have signed the same thing out to both of them? In 2020, as we mentioned, it was Putin, Aliyev, and Pashinyan who signed the trilateral agreement for a ceasefire.
Yes.
And a week ago, it was Aliyev, Pashinyan, and Trump that basically signed this thing. So point 9 of the 2020 agreement is essentially, in my mind, sort of equivalent to what was done last week. So these two guys are going to meet and they're going to talk what? Is it mine or is it yours? And who do we sue? Do we sue Aliyev or do we sue Pashinyan?
Right. So if the topic of Armenia and TRIP is not on the agenda in the meeting between Trump and Putin, it should be. It should be, and I made this point in other forums, and I'll just say it for the sake of your viewers. Bottom line is that the U.S. is in a losing proposition in terms of bringing any peace to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Russia will have to make territorial concessions. The territorial concessions that Russia should make, and I'm not saying it's limited to this, but it should include this, is the withdrawal from Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Okay, there's no reason that Russia should be occupying those two regions at the moment. None. Georgia is not a threat at all. It violates the territorial integrity of Georgia. Okay, and there are ways of doing that. Now, somebody said to me, well, Christine, the problem is like you're expanding the scope. Right. That's what experienced negotiators do, because when you're at a dead end and you say, I just can't make this agreement work, you expand the scope a little bit so you have a little bit more to trade with. Mm-hmm. Then basically you can get Russia to the table with concessions. Okay. But the U.S. is going to need concessions from Russia to be successful with TRIP. The U.S. is going to need some working relationship with Russia, okay, in terms of the Black Sea ports that are taking place and Abkhazia's role in all of that and South Ossetia. These are all important points to have good relations with the Georgian government. So all these things need to be looked at holistically. The only thing that I can say is that I think one of the weaknesses of Trump's team is, like, you'll send in Kellogg, all I do all day long is Ukraine. Okay. But you're not going to solve the problem just looking at it from a single lens. You're going to actually look at a region and say, what are the parties looking to unlock? I do think that Russia has an interest in ensuring that the corridor is not controlled by the Turks. Okay? Because fundamentally, the Russians and the Turks have been at odds with one another for much of their history. There's no natural alignment between Russia and Turkey, period. You can see that, by the way, in Syria right now. Okay? And the Russian presence. Now, I'm not saying that they have poor relations, but they're not natural allies. Okay, so if Trump were actually to speak that language to the Russian government and help him understand that the U.S. can ensure that those routes are open to Russia in a way that Turkey would not respect, well, guess what? You've just created a balance of power in the region where the U.S. is essential, whereas right now the U.S. is really superfluous. So again, it all comes down to balance of power. Can the US create a balance of power in that region and play to different interests and unlock it? Or are they fundamentally going to look at things in silos and not succeed? So hopefully that makes sense to you, but it should be on the agenda. I'm not confident that it is. If you take a look at the people who went out, it was Trump, Lutnick, Rubio, and Witkoff. If I missed someone, I apologize.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll close with just a quick note on the separation of church and state as regards to Armenia. And I want to remind everyone that it was the church and state cooperating that created Christian Armenia back in 301 AD in the persons of King Dirtad and Surp Krikor, who spent 14 years in Khor-Virab and came out and basically was able to convert. Together, they were able to convert all of Armenia. And then a couple of hundred years later, in the year 451, it was Vartan Mamikonian and Revont Yeretz together on the battlefield who were able to keep Armenians Christian. So if anybody is thinking that the church and the state have to be completely firewalled off from each other today, think about our history and be informed a little bit with that. Thank you, Christine, for being on our show.
Thank you.
Very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, that's our show today. This episode was recorded on August 15, I believe, 2025. We've been talking with Christine Arakelian, who is a Fulbright scholar and lawyer with expertise in international global law and finance, M&As, and corporate strategy. She has worked for the Central Intelligence Agency's Office of General Counsel and has advised the Republic of Armenia as an IGORTS Fellow. Ms. Arakelian consults globally on matters pertaining to national security, technology, cybersecurity, healthcare, law, and finance. For more on anyone in this show, myself, Hovik, Ms. Arakelian, go to podcasts.groong.org/episode number to check the links.
And if you've been putting it off, now would be a good time to subscribe to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Those are two platforms we're trying to grow on, and your support would be greatly appreciated. And you could go further by giving us a rating and writing a review, and also commenting on the material there so we can get some traction on those platforms.
I'm Asbed Bedrossian in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan in Yerevan.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.